My name is Margaret Hill, and the night I walked into my husband's office with a bag of takeout and found him feeding another woman, I didn't scream, I didn't cry, and I didn't beg. I served them dinner instead, then I handed him the bill. That's not where this story begins, but it's the moment that everything changed. For most of my 23-year marriage, people looked at David and me and said we were solid, the dependable couple. We were both in our late 40s now, with two grown children who had moved out and started lives of their own. To our neighbors in the Denver suburbs, we looked like the picture of stability. Two steady careers, a comfortable colonial-style house with white shutters, and vacations we saved for every year. And for a long time, I believed it myself. But routines can sometimes cover cracks. Looking back, I realized those cracks had been widening for years. We had slipped into parallel lives, two professionals moving through schedules, calendars, and bills, intersecting at family dinners and holidays, but drifting apart when the house fell quiet at night. David was a corporate attorney at a mid-sized firm downtown. I taught literature at a community college. Our lives overlapped only in the in-between moments, sharing a quick coffee, catching the evening news, or nodding goodnight across a too-large bed. It was last winter when David started working late more often. At first, I didn't question it. His cases were demanding, and deadlines had always stretched him thin. But soon the excuses grew too frequent, too rehearsed. He'd call just after 6, "I'll be home late tonight." Big client meeting. Or he'd text at 8, "Don't wait up. Still at the office." I wanted to believe him. After all, we had history. We had raised two children through fevers, scraped knees, teenage heartbreaks, and college applications. We had survived the 2008 crash when his firm cut salaries, and my classes were nearly eliminated. I thought that kind of history was unshakable. But intuition whispers long before the truth roars. There were little things. His shirt smelled faintly of perfume, not mine, floral and sharp. His phone, once left carelessly on the counter, became glued to his pocket. He guarded it as though it were an extra limb. And when I asked how work was going, his answers grew clipped, distracted, like a man whose thoughts lived somewhere else. One night, I sat at the kitchen table staring at the steam curling from my untouched tea. The clock read 9:47 p.m. David had texted an hour earlier. "Running late again. Don't wait up." I thought about all the meals I had cooked that grew cold, all the nights I had set his plate aside like some ritual of faith. I remembered the younger version of myself waiting by the window when he was just a junior lawyer, worrying he'd be too tired to notice me when he walked in. And now here I was, still waiting, still hoping, except the worry had turned into suspicion. I brushed it away. Maybe this was just what middle-aged marriage looked like. Maybe we were both too tired, too wrapped up in work. I told myself couples hit dry spells. I told myself trust meant not snooping, not accusing. But that night, lying in bed alone, I listened to the silence of our house and felt something tighten in my chest. Trust wasn't supposed to feel this heavy. The next morning, I tried to break the routine. I cooked his favorite breakfast, scrambled eggs with green chilies and cheddar toast, lightly buttered coffee strong. When David came down in his pressed suit, briefcase already in hand, I gestured toward the table. "Thought we could eat together for once," I said. He glanced at his watch, barely pausing. "Sorry, Mags. I've got an early meeting downtown." Rain check. He kissed the top of my head like an afterthought, grabbed his thermos, and rushed out the door. The eggs congealed on the plates. The coffee turned lukewarm. I sat alone, staring at the empty chair across from me. The sunlight spilled across the kitchen counter, highlighting dust I hadn't noticed before, little motes floating in the still air. For the first time, the silence of the house felt less like peace and more like absence. Something was wrong. I just didn't know how wrong yet. That night, when David called to say he'd be home late again, his voice too casual, too smooth, I pressed the phone tighter against my ear. "Another late night?" I asked softly. "Yeah, big project." "You know how it is," he replied. except I didn't know anymore. And that's when the first crack widened. Not because of his words, but because of the emptiness behind them. I hung up, sat down at the table, and pulled out a notebook. I started writing the dates he claimed to be working late. Each one neatly listed a pattern slowly forming on the page. At that moment, I wasn't ready to admit what my gut already screamed. But I knew one thing: something had shifted in my marriage, and pretending not to see it wouldn't protect me anymore. I was no longer the wife who waited by the window. I was the woman who would start to look for the truth. The trouble with denial is that it works like a bandage over a wound you refuse to clean. For a while it covers, hides, numbs, but underneath infection spreads until it hurts too much to ignore. That's what those early weeks felt like, me pressing gauze over something festering, pretending if I didn't poke too hard it might heal on its own. But the truth has a way of leaking through. It happened on a Tuesday evening in February, the kind of night when Denver's air turned brittle and the snow made every street lamp glow like a halo. David had promised he'd be late again, something about prepping for a client deposition. I had just finished grading a stack of essays, my red pen, leaving trails of corrections across pages when the house phone rang. We almost never use the landline anymore. "Mrs. Hill," a hesitant male voice asked. "This is Roger. I work with your husband." Yes. My heart skipped, an irrational part of me leaping to worry about an accident. Nothing bad," he rushed. David left his leather folio in the conference room. Thought he'd want it for tomorrow morning. "Oh," I exhaled, gripping the receiver tighter. "He's at the office now, right?" There was a pause. "Actually, he left around 6. Said he was meeting someone for dinner." The silence stretched. I managed a polite, "Thank you," then hung up, staring at the phone like it might confess more if I shook it. Dinner. He'd told me he'd be buried in briefs until late. My pen rolled off the table and clattered onto the hardwood floor, a sound far too loud for an empty house. That night, I paced the kitchen, pulling old memories from the shelves like dusty cookbooks. I remembered the early days when he worked late, really late, back when he was still proving himself at the firm. He'd stumble in after midnight, exhausted but proud, loosened tie hanging around his neck. He'd tell me everything: judges, clients, even the pressure of senior partners. I used to fall asleep to the hum of his voice. Now the only thing humming was suspicion. The next morning, I confronted him gently. "How was work last night?" I asked while packing my bag for class. He barely looked up from buttering his toast. "Long. Exhausting." "And dinner?" I tried testing. He froze just long enough for me to notice, then smiled thinly, grabbed a sandwich at my desk. I nodded, but the taste of betrayal settled on my tongue, bitter as aspirin. For days I told myself maybe Roger was mistaken. Maybe David had gone out with clients and it was all professional. Maybe I was twisting coincidences into conspiracies. After all, I had always trusted him. Trust was the foundation we built our life on. Without it, what was left? Then came the lipstick. It was faint, barely there, a smudge on his white collar, pale rose in color. I found it when I collected his dress shirt from the laundry basket. I held it up to the light, my breath shallow. It wasn't my shade. I hadn't worn lipstick to campus in months, preferring a quick swipe of balm before class. The stain stared back like evidence at a crime scene. I carried it to the kitchen, laid it flat on the counter, and poured myself a glass of wine, though it was barely past noon. The Cabernet coated my tongue deep and heavy. I traced the smear with my finger, wondering if it had happened by accident, a hug, a cheek brushed too close. But in my bones, I knew better. I didn't confront him then. Some part of me wanted one more piece of proof, something undeniable, something that would silence even my own instinct to rationalize. And that's when the memory came. Our 20th anniversary just 3 years earlier. We had planned to go to Paris but canceled when my mother fell ill. Instead, David surprised me with dinner at a little French bistro downtown, candlelight flickering between us. I remember staring across the table at him and thinking, we survived. We're still us. Now, staring at the lipstick stain, I realized I didn't know who us was anymore. The following week, I overheard a slip at the grocery store. One of the partners' wives bumped into me near the produce aisle. We exchanged pleasantries, then she laughed lightly. "David's been working so hard lately. At least he has someone to keep him company through those long nights." I blinked. Someone. "Oh, that new associate, the pretty brunette in marketing. What's her name? Heather Holly. I don't keep up." She waved dismissively, then hurried off with her cart. My pulse roared in my ears. The bandage was ripped clean away. Beneath it, the wound throbbed raw and undeniable. That night, as snow tapped against the window and David texted running late again, I stared at my reflection in the glass. A woman in her late 40s, lines around her eyes, hands that had cooked 1,000 dinners, folded 1,000 loads of laundry, held 1,000 worries for this man. I whispered to myself no more. I wouldn't scream. I wouldn't beg. But I also wouldn't keep pretending. If David was hiding something, I would find it. Not because I wanted to save the marriage, not anymore, but because after years of sacrificing my own doubts for the sake of peace, I finally owed myself the truth. Once you let suspicion take root, it grows fast. Every movement, every glance, every sigh from David became another leaf on a tree I no longer wanted but couldn't cut down. And when you've lived with someone for more than 2 decades, you learn their rhythms. You know when their laughter is genuine and when it's borrowed, when their silences are about stress, and when they're about guilt. I knew. I just needed proof that would stop even me from making excuses. The first clue came from the recycling bin. I wasn't looking, not really. I'd taken out the trash one Sunday morning and noticed a crumpled paper stuck between the cardboard and cans. It was a receipt from Osteria Milano, one of those upscale Italian places David had always claimed was too pretentious for his taste. The date was Thursday, the time 8:43 p.m. 2 entrees, a bottle of Barolo, and dessert. Thursday night, he had called me at 7:30. "Working late, order yourself something," he'd said, his voice calm. I had heated leftover soup, eaten it alone, and gone to bed early with a book. He had walked in close to midnight, smelling faintly of wine and cologne. I smoothed the receipt flat against the counter and stared at the ink, my stomach twisting. It could have been a client dinner, yes. But why hadn't he mentioned it? Why not tell me he'd been out at a restaurant? The following week, I checked our joint credit card statement online, something I rarely bothered with beyond paying bills. There it was again, multiple charges at restaurants we never visited together. Always on weeknights. Always on the same card David used for work expenses. The pattern formed itself: Tuesdays, Thursdays, occasional Fridays. A rhythm. I told myself maybe I should stop, close the laptop, go back to my grading. But curiosity and dread tangled inside me, pushing me further. I clicked through 3 months of statements. The story was written there in dollar amounts and dates, an invisible diary of meals, drinks, and nights I'd spent waiting alone. Still, receipts and charges weren't people. I wanted faces. One evening, I drove downtown after my last class ended early. David had texted an hour before, "Don't wait up. Big meeting late night." The streets glistened with melted snow, neon signs reflecting off puddles. I parked 2 blocks from his office and sat in the dark car, my hands tight on the steering wheel. At 8:15, the glass doors opened. David walked out, not carrying his briefcase. Beside him was a woman, tall brunette in a camel coat. She laughed at something he said, her hand brushing his arm. He leaned toward her in that easy way, like a man comfortable with familiarity. My breath caught. They didn't head toward the parking garage. They crossed the street toward Bistro Lumiere, the kind of place people booked for anniversaries and promotions. I watched through the windshield as the hostess led them inside. For a long time, I couldn't move. The city noise, blurred horns, chatter, the faint hum of music from passing cars. All I could hear was the echo of his voice in my head. "Late night, don't wait up." I could have marched in right then, confronted them in front of clinking glasses and linen tablecloths. But something held me back. Not fear exactly, but calculation. I didn't want a messy explosion. I wanted control. I sat there until the restaurant lights dimmed lower for evening service, until I saw David lift a glass of wine to his lips and lean closer to the woman, his smile one I hadn't seen in years. That's when the clarity hit. It wasn't just a fling. It wasn't stress relief. It was a whole other life built in the cracks of ours. I drove home slowly, headlights cutting through the cold dark. Inside the house, the silence pressed down heavier than ever. I poured myself a drink, sat at the kitchen table, and stared at the calendar hanging on the wall. Each square filled with my neat handwriting appointments, classes, birthdays. His squares were empty, just his work hours assumed, unrecorded, unshared. That night, I made a decision. I would stop waiting. I would start planning. The next day, between classes, I slipped into the library and logged onto one of the public computers. I typed her name into the search bar because by then I had one. Heather Collins, Junior Associate, Marketing Department. I'd heard it whispered once, remembered the casual mention at the grocery store. Her profile appeared on the firm's website. Young, maybe 30 at most. Bright smile degree from Northwestern. Single, it claimed, but I knew better. I clicked through LinkedIn, then Facebook, piecing together fragments, photos at office parties, snapshots with friends at rooftop bars. She looked like a woman at the start of everything, career, youth, possibility. I closed the screen, bile rising. Driving home, I thought about all the late nights I had excused, all the dinners eaten alone. I thought about the years I'd folded his laundry, typed his resumes, stood beside him through promotions and layoffs. And now here he was, handing that attention, that energy to someone new. By the time I pulled into the driveway, the ache in my chest had hardened into something sharper. Not despair, not yet. Strategy. If David wanted romance after hours, if he wanted dinner with someone special, then I would be the one to deliver it on my own terms. I picked up a pad of paper from the counter and began to write down times, dates, places. My own investigation, neat and methodical. Because if I was going to confront him, it wouldn't be in the heat of a parking lot or the shadow of a restaurant window. It would be at the table he had set for her. Once the first shock passed, a strange calmness took over me. Not the shaky denial that had carried me through the first cracks, but something colder, steadier. Like steel setting after fire. For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt focused. David's lies weren't clever. They followed a rhythm, and rhythms can be tracked. Tuesday, Thursday, sometimes Friday. Always working late. Always the same office line delivered like a man reading from a well-worn script. And I, the dutiful audience, had applauded in silence for too long. Now I was ready to flip the stage lights on. I began quietly. A few weeks of observation, noting when he left, when he came home, when he showered, when his phone buzzed with messages he shielded from my view. Each detail a thread I wound tighter around my fingers. On a Thursday, while he showered before work, I checked his suit pocket. A folded receipt slipped easily into my hand. Osteria Milano again. 2 entree, dessert, wine. I placed it back without a crease, my heart pounding not with guilt, but with confirmation. That night, I sat at the kitchen table, the same table where I had once waited for his footsteps, and mapped my plan. I wasn't going to scream, throw plates, or beg for explanations he'd twist into excuses. No, my revenge would be quiet, deliberate, humiliating. He wanted dinner, I would serve it. The trick was timing. The following week, I paid more attention to his calendar. He'd left his laptop open once while running to grab the mail, his Outlook schedule glowing across the screen. Friday night, 7:00 p.m., a blocked entry labeled Client Prep. I almost laughed. Even his lies had become lazy. I knew it wasn't a client meeting, it was her. That Friday, instead of waiting at home, I stopped by a local Thai restaurant we used to love in our early years of marriage, before his tastes became too polished for casual places. The owners still knew me. They smiled when I ordered David's favorites: pad thai with shrimp penang curry and 2 spring rolls with peanut sauce. The smell of basil and coconut milk rose warm and comforting from the bags, the kind of comfort that had long been missing in my marriage. Carrying those takeout bags, I felt like I was holding a weapon sharper than any knife. On the drive downtown, my hands gripped the steering wheel, knuckles pale. I rehearsed the lines in my head. I wouldn't cry. I wouldn't falter. I would walk in calm, set the food down, and let silence do the work. The city lights blurred by. I remembered the early years when David surprised me with flowers at work, when he left sticky notes on the fridge saying, "Love you back late." How easily those gestures had vanished, replaced by excuses and lipstick stains that weren't mine. By the time I pulled into the parking garage beneath his office, my tears had dried into something sharper. I rode the elevator up to the 22nd floor. My heels clicked against the marble, echoing in the empty hallway. The office glass doors gleamed under fluorescent lights. Beyond them, I could already see the glow of his desk lamp, soft and golden, spilling into the corridor. Inside, I paused, steadying my breath. The air smelled faintly of coffee and paper, but underneath lingered another scent: floral, expensive perfume, the kind that didn't belong to me. I tightened my grip on the takeout bags. From down the hall came a faint ripple of laughter. David's, and a higher, lilting voice hers. My chest constricted, but I kept walking, each step deliberate, heels striking the tile in a rhythm that announced my arrival before I reached the door. Through the glass wall of his office, I saw them. David leaning back in his chair, jacket off, tie loosened. Across from him, the brunette Heather perched on the edge of his desk, wineglass in hand, her smile wide. A takeout box already open between them, though not Thai. Sushi, by the looks of it, spread across neat trays. The scene was almost laughably cliché. I pushed the door open, the hinges creaking softly. Their laughter stopped mid-breath. "Surprise," I said calmly, holding up the bags. "I thought I'd bring dinner since you're working so hard." The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. Heather's smile evaporated, her wineglass trembling in her hand. David's face drained of color, eyes wide, lips parting like a man who had just seen a ghost. Margaret," he stammered, rising from his chair. "What are you—" I placed the takeout bags on the desk right between them. The scent of basil and curry filled the room, clashing with the sharp tang of soy and wasabi. "I figured you'd be hungry," I said, my voice even. "Long nights need fuel, don't they?" Heather set her glass down, her hands fumbling. I should go." "No," I interrupted softly, my gaze fixed on David. "Stay, please. We have enough food for 3. David ran a hand through his hair, his mouth opening, closing, no words forming. I reached into the bag, pulling out the neat white containers, setting them carefully on his polished mahogany desk. One by one, like a ritual. Spring rolls, pad thai curry. The scent grew stronger, mingling with the awkward silence. Finally, I placed a folded receipt on top. "Don't worry," I said, my eyes locking with his. "This one's on you." His jaw clenched, his face burning with something between shame and anger. Heather looked down at her hands as if hoping the desk might swallow her whole. I didn't wait for excuses. I didn't wait for pleas. I straightened my shoulders, let the silence linger a moment longer, then stepped back. "Enjoy your meal," I said softly. "It might be the last one we share." And with that, I walked out, my heels echoing through the hall like a closing gavel. The bags of food remained behind, steaming in the stale office air, a dinner served not with love, but with truth. When people imagine betrayal, they picture screaming matches, slammed doors, maybe a thrown glass or two. But the most devastating confrontations aren't loud at all. They're quiet, steady, like a storm that doesn't waste its breath on thunder. That's how I felt as I left the takeout bags on David's desk, the scent of curry curling into the air like incense at a funeral. For a moment, none of us moved. David stood rigid behind his chair, his mouth working silently. Heather slid off the edge of his desk, fumbling with her coat, her face pale. The office lights reflected in the glass walls, framing the three of us like actors frozen mid-scene. "Margaret, please." "David?" finally said, his voice cracking. "This isn't what I cut in my tone, calm but sharp enough to slice. Isn't dinner. Isn't what you do every week when you tell me not to wait up." Heather flinched. David's eyes darted between us, desperate for a script that didn't exist. She's just a colleague," he sputtered. "We were working late and—" On sushi and Shiraz, I lifted one eyebrow. Fascinating casework. Heather grabbed her purse. "I should go." "Sit," I said firmly, surprising even myself. My voice carried the weight of years spent swallowing words now released in perfect control. She froze, then sank into the chair by the window, eyes downcast. I turned to David, who looked as if the floor had tilted beneath him. "You've lied for months," I said evenly. "Do you have any idea how many nights I waited? How many dinners I let go cold, believing you were buried in briefs and contracts?" He opened his mouth, but I raised my hand. "Don't. I've heard enough lies." His jaw tightened. "Margaret, I never wanted to hurt you." I laughed softly, the sound brittle. "That's the anthem of every man caught with another woman in his office. You didn't want to hurt me, you just wanted me to stay blind." Heather's eyes filled with tears. "You didn't mean for me to find out," I interrupted, turning my gaze to her. "But you did mean every smile, every dinner, every late night spent here, instead of with your own dignity. Don't play innocent now." She shrank into her chair, silent. I stepped closer to David. The desk between us, now covered with steaming containers and the folded receipt like evidence at trial. "Do you remember our first apartment?" I asked. "The one with the leaky faucet and the broken heater. We ate Thai takeout on the floor because we couldn't afford a table yet." He swallowed, nodding faintly. "I chose that food tonight for a reason," I continued. "It was our beginning. And now it's the meal that ends us." His face crumpled, the weight of my words sinking in. "Margaret, please. We can fix this. Counseling, whatever you want. Don't throw away 23 years over a mistake." I leaned in, my voice low. "A mistake is forgetting an anniversary. A mistake is saying something cruel in anger. What you've done is a choice over and over again. You chose her night after night while I sat alone convincing myself you still loved me." He reached across the desk, but I stepped back. "Don't touch me." The room grew unbearably quiet. Even the hum of the fluorescent lights seemed to fade, leaving only the sound of my heartbeat pounding steady in my ears. Finally, I picked up the receipt and held it out. "This is yours. Just like the lies, just like the betrayal. Consider it the first bill you're paying without me covering the cost." His hand trembled as he took it. He looked smaller, then deflated, as though the sharp lines of his suit couldn't hold up the collapse of his pride. Heather stood abruptly, clutching her coat. "I can't do this," she whispered, and fled the office, her heels clicking frantically down the hall. David sank into his chair, the paper limp in his hands. He looked at me with eyes wide, pleading like a man drowning. "Don't leave me, Margaret. You're my life." "She means nothing." I straightened my shoulders back, my voice steady. "If I'm your life, you should have lived like it. Instead, you've been dining on lies, and tonight I served you the truth." I turned, walking toward the door. My reflection in the glass caught my eye, a woman not broken, not hysterical, but unshaken, walking out with her dignity intact. Behind me, I heard him whisper, "Please," but I didn't slow. The hallway stretched before me, silent and gleaming. Each step of my heels echoed like punctuation, marking the end of a chapter I had never wanted to write. I didn't look back. The night after the confrontation, I didn't sleep. Not from tears, not from regret, but from the way silence filled the house like a new tenant. The bed felt bigger than it had in years, the air colder, but my chest was strangely light, as though I had set down a burden I didn't know I'd been carrying. David didn't come home. His side of the bed stayed smooth, untouched. I lay awake staring at the ceiling fan spinning slow circles, remembering the look on his face as I walked out of his office, not angry, not even defensive, just desperate, stripped of the lies he'd wrapped himself in. By morning, my phone buzzed with messages. "Please come home early. We need to talk. I'm sorry. I was stupid. I love you. It didn't mean anything. Please don't give up on us." I read them all, thumb hovering over the reply button, but I said nothing. Silence was more powerful than any response I could have given. That evening he appeared at the house. His tie hung loose, his eyes rimmed red as if he hadn't slept either. He carried flowers, white lilies, my favorite once upon a time. He set them on the kitchen counter with a trembling hand. "Maggie, please," he said softly. "Can we just talk?" I leaned against the sink, arms crossed. "Talk. After months of lies, you finally want to talk." His voice cracked. "I made a mistake. I was lonely. You've been so busy with your classes and I held up a hand. "Don't you dare put this on me. I may have been busy, but I was faithful. I was here waiting. You were the one who chose someone else." His face flushed with shame. It was never about love. It was distraction. "I swear it's over now." I told her not to call me again. "Convenient," I said dryly. "You end it only after I caught you. That isn't remorse. That's damage control." He reached for me, but I stepped back. "Margaret, I can fix this. Counseling, new start, anything you want. Just don't throw away 23 years. I looked at him, at the man I'd once promised forever to, and realized forever had already ended. It ended the night he first said, working late while sitting across from another woman. "I'm not throwing it away," I said quietly. "You did." His shoulders slumped. He sank into a chair, burying his face in his hands. For once, I didn't rush to comfort him. I let him sit there, drowning in the silence he'd created. The days that followed blurred together. He tried everything: voicemails, long emails full of apologies, flowers delivered to my office. He even cornered me in the driveway once, his voice cracking as he begged me to reconsider. But each attempt only hardened my resolve. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger burns hot, then cools. What remained was clarity. I'd spent years being the steady wife, the patient partner, the woman who excused long hours and broken promises. Now I was the woman who had finally looked the truth in the eye and decided she deserved better. Word spread quickly, as it always does. His colleagues whispered. Friends called to check in, their voices carrying the careful tone people use when they don't know which side to stand on. Even our grown children noticed, though. I kept the details from them, only telling them that their father and I were working through something. David's pride began to crumble. He confessed one evening, his voice low, that some partners at the firm had heard about the scene in his office. Reputation was everything in his world, and now he was no longer the man with polished confidence, but the husband caught red-handed, unable to manage his own home. I listened, then said nothing. His reputation had been his greatest love, not me. One night he appeared at the door again, disheveled, holding another bouquet. "You can hate me forever if you want," he said, voice hoarse. "But don't leave me. Don't let this be the end." I took the flowers, set them gently on the porch railing, and closed the door without a word. The truth was, it wasn't the end, not of me anyway. It was the beginning. I started going out more, meeting friends for dinner, walking through the park on weekends, rediscovering the parts of myself that had nothing to do with being someone's wife. I even signed up for a pottery class, my hands shaping clay into forms that felt solid and real in a way my marriage hadn't in years. Every time David tried to reach me, I remembered the look on his face as I set down that takeout bag, the silence that wrapped the room when he realized his lies had nowhere left to hide. That was the night I stopped being the woman who waited. That was the night I served him not just dinner, but the bill for every betrayal. And the fallout, as heavy as it was, didn't crush me. It freed me. Spring came earlier than usual that year, sunlight pouring through the kitchen windows of my now much quieter home. The house once filled with David's heavy footsteps and his constant phone calls now belonged to me alone. At first, the silence pressed against my ears like a weight. But over time, it became a comfort, a reminder that peace doesn't always come with company. It often begins with solitude. After the night of the confrontation, things unraveled quickly. David tried for weeks to patch together what had already been burned. Flowers arrived on my desk at the college. Emails filled with rehearsed apologies appeared in my inbox, and long voicemails poured out his regret. His words all blurred together into one endless chorus. I love you. I made a mistake. Please forgive me. But when trust shatters, it doesn't return on command. And forgiveness, I realized, isn't something you hand out just because someone begs. Forgiveness is earned, and sometimes it's not deserved. So I hired an attorney. The divorce papers went through in less than 6 months. 23 years reduced to a file folder and a signature. Some days the finality stung like an open wound. Other days it felt like fresh air filling my lungs for the first time in years. Friends asked if I regretted it. I told them no. I regretted the years I spent blind waiting, excusing, but not the moment I chose myself. David didn't take it well. He lost weight, lost his easy charm, even stepped down temporarily from the firm's board under the cloud of whispers. The man who had once lived for appearances was now a shadow stripped of the mask he had polished so carefully. He called less often as time passed, and eventually the silence between us became permanent. As for me, I built something new. I redecorated the house, painted the walls a soft sage, replaced the heavy curtains with sheer ones that let light pour in. I filled the shelves with plants, their leaves stretching toward the sun, thriving in a space no longer heavy with lies. I even adopted a dog, a golden retriever mix I named Scout, who wagged his tail like he'd been waiting for me all along. Teaching felt different too. My lectures grew bolder, my patience deeper. My students, most of them young and uncertain about love, asked me once if I believed in second chances. I smiled and told them, always. But sometimes the second chance isn't with the same person. Sometimes it's with yourself. And in the midst of that rebuilding, something unexpected happened. A colleague introduced me to a man named Tom, a widower, kind-eyed with a laugh that rolled warm and easy. We started with coffee, then dinners, then long walks with Scout by the river. It wasn't fireworks or sweeping declarations. It was steady, patient, two people choosing honesty above everything else. I didn't know where it would lead, and for once I wasn't in a hurry to find out. Because this time I wasn't looking for someone to complete me. I was already whole. One evening, as I stood on my porch watching the sun dip low behind the mountains, I thought back to that night in David's office. The takeout bags, the stunned silence, the bill I slid across the desk. It wasn't just food I served him that night. It was truth plated and steaming, impossible to ignore. And in serving him, I finally served myself. I chose dignity over denial, clarity over comfort, freedom over fear. And that choice, though painful, became the first step toward a life I could claim as mine again. So here I am, Margaret Hill. Once a wife who waited by the window, now a woman who walks her own path steady and unashamed. Betrayal may have broken the marriage, but it didn't break me. It rebuilt me. And if you're listening, maybe you've lived through something similar. Maybe you've sat at a cold table wondering why the person you love is always late. Maybe you've questioned your worth because someone else failed to see it. If so, hear this: the best revenge isn't anger or shouting or even a clever trap. The best revenge is choosing yourself, walking away with your head high, and living a life that no betrayal can touch. So what do you think? Was I too strong or just strong enough? Have you ever faced betrayal and found your own way forward? Share your thoughts, I'd love to know. And if you want more stories of resilience, heartbreak, and rebirth, don't forget to follow along. Because sometimes the ending of one chapter isn't the end at all. It's the start of the story you were meant to write.